On a frozen lake in northern Alaska, people are spreading something across the ice, working outward, covering it a football field at a time. It looks like snow. It is glass. Tiny hollow spheres of silica, each one smaller than a grain of sand, thin-walled and light enough to sit on top of the ice rather than sink into it. They are there to do one job. Ice reflects sunlight. Dark water swallows it. If the Arctic is losing its white, the idea was to put some white back by hand. The organization doing it was called the Arctic Ice Project, and in January 2025, after more than a decade of work, they shut themselves down. Not because it failed. So why hasn't anyone refrozen the Arctic? It seems like it should be one of the more solvable problems, doesn't it? Not because it's easy, but because it's simple. There is a physical mechanism with a knob on it, and the knob is reflectivity. Fresh sea ice sends most of the sunlight that hits it straight back out to space. Open ocean absorbs almost all of it. Roughly 80% bounced away by new ice, roughly 90% swallowed by the water underneath. The same square meter of planet, doing opposite jobs, depending only on whether it happens to be frozen. That difference is the whole game. And it is a feedback loop, which is the frightening part and also, if you squint, the hopeful part. Less ice means more absorbed heat, means warmer water, means less ice. A loop that runs away from you in one direction can, in principle, be nudged to run the other way. So people tried. The Arctic Ice Project spent years on those microspheres. They ran the field trials on lakes rather than open ocean in places like Utqiagvik at the top of Alaska. Their climate modeling was going their way. Their own farewell message described the impact simulations as promising, with a paper still to come. But that was the easy part. The hard part is arithmetic, and the arithmetic is what breaks every plan of this kind. The Arctic Ocean covers roughly 14 million square kilometers. Any intervention that has to physically touch a surface has to touch a surface the size of a continent, every year, forever, in the most hostile working environment on the planet, where the machinery you leave behind gets crushed by moving ice. A different proposal, published in 2017, tried to thicken the ice instead of whitening it. Wind-powered pumps standing on the ice through winter, drawing seawater up and letting it freeze on top, adding a meter of ice a season. The physics is sound. The scale required to do it across the whole Arctic ran to something like 10 million pumps and a price tag in the region of $500 billion a year, indefinitely. That is not a project anybody funds. That is a permanent global industry, invented from nothing, doing maintenance on a planet. And it gets stranger, because the scale problem is not what killed the microspheres. The toxicology did. Late in the program, the ecotoxicological tests came back, and they showed something the team had not wanted to find. The material posed risks to the Arctic food chain. The hollow glass beads, spread across the surface, had more potential to harm the marine ecosystem than to restore it because of what they did to the plankton, the drifting green machinery at the very base of everything, the thing that every fish, seal, whale, and person up there is ultimately standing on. To save the ice, they would have had to poison the water underneath it. There was also a second refusal, and it came from people rather than data. Indigenous communities across the Arctic had objected for years to the material, to the precedent, and above all to the process, to being the place where an idea from Silicon Valley gets tested. The organization's own closing statement listed it plainly alongside the science, the test results, the broad skepticism toward geoengineering, the resistance to introducing new materials into the Arctic Ocean, and a funding environment that was drying up. The board looked at all of it and closed the doors. Now, here is where it turns on you. When you read that a group of clever, well-funded people had a plan to refreeze the Arctic, you felt something loosen slightly in your chest. Somebody is on it. Somebody with a laboratory and a budget is handling the terrifying thing so you don't have to. That relief is the most dangerous substance in this entire story. It is the reason people who study this call these ideas a moral hazard, and they don't mean it as an insult, they mean it mechanically. The existence of a rescue plan changes behavior. It buys permission. Every hour the conversation spends on glass beads is an hour it is not spending on the boring, proven, deeply unglamorous thing that actually controls how much ice there is. Because that is the reframe, and it is the opposite of what the shutdown looks like from outside. The headline reads like geoengineering failing. Read it again. A group of people spent more than a decade and a great deal of money building something they believed in, watched their own climate simulations come back promising, then read a toxicology report that pointed the other way, and stopped. They did not bury it. They did not push for one more funding round. They published the reason and closed. That almost never happens. Institutions do not usually kill their own reason for existing on the strength of an inconvenient result. The Arctic does not need us to be ingenious. It has never needed us to be ingenious. It needs the water and the air above it to be colder, and there is exactly one lever that reliably does that, and everybody has known what it is for 50 years. It is not a lever anyone can pull alone, and it does not photograph well, and there is no moment where a helicopter lands on the ice and someone says, "We did it." But it works, which is more than can be said for the glass. So the ice is still going, and it will keep going for a while yet, regardless of what anyone does this decade, because the heat already in the ocean has not finished doing its work. What changed in January 2025 was smaller than the ice, and, in its way, more encouraging. A room full of people who wanted very badly to be the ones who saved the Arctic looked at evidence that said they'd heard it instead, and believed the evidence. We are going to need a great many more rooms like that.